Good evening, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. We really appreciate you coming out on a Thursday night and for supporting Cannabis Community Care and Research Network and our partners and our speakers on this stage. My name is Dr. Marion McNabb, and I'm the CEO of Cannabis Community Care and Research Network. C3RN is what we like to call ourselves. We're excited to work with the Association of Cannabis Specialists to co-host this event tonight, of which we have founding members and different members here on the panel tonight. So we're excited to have you here for Cannabis Research Collaborations from Seed to Bedside. This event was designed to encourage dialogue and discussion around how we can further collaborate between cannabis industry, medical communities, and academic communities to advance cannabis research and innovation. We have some incredible speakers here tonight, and over 20 organizations that are leading the force and change as advancing cannabis as a medicine. Thank you all for being here. So C3RN is a cannabis education, advocacy, and research organization that has worked over the last year to advocate for research licenses to be available in the Commonwealth and under the new adult use regulatory framework. This is the third of 6 events that C3RN is hosting on different topics. From January, we started and focused on the state of the science related to medical cannabis, laboratory testing, genetic variability. And then the second focused on the state of the science and related to access and equity in the industry. We're here tonight to talk about how we constructively and openly dialogue to further research connections for medical cannabis. You can think of these events like a think tank or an open dialogue forum. So there's no silly questions. We're here to learn from each other in a respectful and open fashion. We will have a few opening remarks tonight from some key speakers, followed by a panel discussion. And then we will have more networking time and food and beverages available. And as part of the event series, we're preparing reports from abstracts that different groups have been preparing. And we'll prepare a report of the discussions of this event and share it out to the audience. So please stay tuned. We are also video recording, and we'll publish the video after this event as well. So to kick it off, as a researcher and a digital health enthusiast and academic, we asked you all to use texting when you came in as a way to understand what area of cannabis research most interests you. So as you can see, and I can't see the percentage, maybe somebody could tell me, but it seems like medical cannabis is the winner. So that's, obviously very relevant. And our previous 2 events, the winner was actually cannabis cultivation. Now, obviously, we have clearly a medical audience, which is really great. So we'll be using the texting feature in our panel discussion. So you can know we have a lot of members in the audience, so we'll be able to text in your questions, and we'll have those shown, and our moderator will be able to use those. So now I'd like to thank our sponsors and everybody that's here in the interactive learning stations that are here tonight. We're really appreciative. We couldn't do this without you. With the sponsorship that we've received, we were able to, in the second month, launch a student scholarship campaign, and we're really grateful for that. I'll speak a little bit more about that. So as many of you know, we're here to talk about research and connections in the industry. But historically, researchers have faced many regulatory and funding hurdles to actually further the science in this area. In 2017, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine published a systematic literature review, which would be the latest state of the evidence regarding the health effects of cannabis and cannabinoids, both from a beneficial and harm reduction perspective. So this committee reviewed over 10,000 abstracts, actually 24,000 articles, then 10,000 abstracts, to look at what the state of the science really is. And it's with this report that C3RN is working to advance the scientific agenda moving forward. These barriers to researchers have included just the fact that it's a federally illegal substance, extremely long delays and hurdles to get actual approval to conduct studies, the ability to study only one type of cannabis in Mississippi through the federal channels, and a severe lack of funding. So while there is data out there on some of the preliminary benefits, there's still more that can be had. This month, thankfully, the Cannabis Control Commission finalized the adult use regulations for the industry. That includes a research license. So this will greatly transform the ability to conduct studies, and a really exciting and historic time. Over the last year, our team has testified over 25 times and written hundreds of pages of writing. And we're grateful that we are now in this phase, and having these event series is a way to help develop what we're calling a virtual cannabis center of excellence to make these connections to further science. So we are, if anybody's interested in the events and sponsoring and partnering on a research studies, definitely come find us or one of us with a C3RN card. With this in mind, why did we have this particular event? As a public health professional, I often think of interdisciplinary work. We all have different skill sets and we all have different expertise that can be brought together in a research team. So we can think of this maybe in three large buckets. We have a clinical community that's treating patients. We have an academic community that is driving science. And then we have the cannabis community that's here for not only patient management, but also referrals and providing the supply. So all of these three major groups of stakeholders have a stake to play, which is why we decided to host this type of event. So along with that, and along with our spirit of academic innovation, we decided to host this, and grateful to G-Tech Labs for having us tonight at this innovative co-working space. So now I'd like to introduce Jeff Chang, the CEO of G-Tech Labs, to come up and give some opening remarks.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to G-Tech Labs. I'd like to thank C3RN, Marian, Randy, and Nigam, and everyone else that's responsible for putting this event together, especially the esteemed panelists and sponsors and exhibitors. So what is G-Tech Labs? G-Tech Labs is a shared workspace for product development. You might ask, why is there another co-working space popping up? We believe that most of the other ones that are available now are not suited for people that are trying to develop physical products. And so that's the space that we're trying to get into. We have about 30,000 square feet of workshop space, conference rooms, and offices, so that people who are developing physical products can have some place where they can actually make something and still have office space and conference room where they can have a professional front. In our particular facility, we're interested in technologies like IoT, food tech, and also possibly like cannabis technologies. So when Marian and Nigam and Randy approached us about doing this event, I thought it was a great idea, especially with the medical focus of this event. Without taking up more of your time, if anybody's interested in learning more or is looking for a space to develop something, come find me, I'll be around. Otherwise, I hope everyone enjoys today's event. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for having us here. So as an academic and an educator, I'm really excited to continue the work that we've been doing to make sure that students are a part of this event series and a part of our work moving forward. And I'm really grateful to the support of the sponsors that have allowed us to do it. Could we get a raise of hands of those that are here tonight for a student scholarship? We have a few? Oh, we've got, all right. Thank you. It's a really with big thanks to Joseph Gilmore at the Students for Sensible Drug Policy in UMass Boston that we are able to recruit students in a very effective way. And so I'd like to hand it to him to give some opening remarks.
Thank you, Marian. Hi, everybody. My name is Joe Gilmore. I am the president of Students for Sensible Drug Policy at UMass Boston and a co-founder of the Massachusetts Recreational Consumer Council, where I also serve as the community outreach director. My role within both of these organizations is to educate, empower, and connect people with legal opportunities in the cannabis industry. This is easier said than done, but as the expression goes, if you choose a job that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I've never found a more fulfilling industry to be a part of. A couple of years ago, I was a new transfer student at UMass Boston, trying to figure out what career path I was going to take. And I knew I didn't want to get stuck in a cubicle working for a company that I didn't align with my personal views. So I thought to myself, these are my last 2 years in school. What am I going to do to secure my future after graduation? My pursuit to become a part of the cannabis industry began after I learned about the injustices and destruction marijuana prohibition has created in my hometown of Dorchester. In order to make positive changes in my community, I started a chapter of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. So SSDP is a youth-led organization dedicated to combating the societal impacts of the war on drugs. I got involved as a volunteer on the community. I got involved as a volunteer on the Yes on 4 campaign as a community organizer. Essentially, just trying to get people engaged in the whole activism process and try to make this a legal industry. I was once a very introverted student. I was very shy. I didn't really talk to much people. But as soon as I became a consumer advocate, I opened up. I spoke to as many people as I could, and here we are today. So the challenge for many young people when deciding to enter the cannabis industry is finding where to start. For those young people in the audience today, you've already taken the first step by showing up to this event. And if you look around, you'll see all types of people from all different backgrounds, old, young, from different political backgrounds and perspectives and levels of knowledge of the cannabis plant. It's important to note that those established in the cannabis industry were not born into this. The experts in this field were at one time merely curious individuals with a spark in their hearts and minds that drove them to work hard and achieve success. I challenge you all to find your spark. Find what motivates and drives you to enter this space and how you can transfer your accumulated skills and life experiences to further the cannabis movement. My mission is to inspire the young people of Massachusetts to think of cannabis industry as a viable path forward. My personal belief is that if utilized correctly, cannabis has the ability to significantly reduce many of the society's problems, including climate change, chronic medical conditions, and widespread economic inequality. Currently, our state is at the forefront of dispelling decades of fabricated lies and misconceptions through our newly implemented ability to legally acquire cannabis research licenses. As Massachusetts is the mecca of educational institutions, now more than ever is the time for students to get involved in these opportunities. And to the employers and research organizations in the audience, I'm speaking to you too. Massachusetts is home to some of the brightest and most resourceful students who are eager to get into this field. And I hope you all get a chance to network and become acquainted with what you can offer each other. By 2021, the Massachusetts cannabis industry is projected to create over $2.3 billion in economic activity, as well as 17,000 employment opportunities. I can assure you that there's a place for everyone in this industry. And cannabis is so much more than what we commonly perceive it to be. We need to all recognize that cannabis is medicine, finance, and management. Cannabis is social justice, economics, and art. Cannabis is science, technology, engineering, and math. Cannabis is poetry, and now for a short poem inspired by this event. The oceans are rising, Neponset is flooded. We need research. The cancer is spreading, the seizures ongoing. We need research. The prisons are filled, our communities are desperate. We need research. The federal government equates cannabis with heroin. We need research. Cannabis is going to change the world, and I invite you all to be a part of creating that change. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid to take that leap. Follow your passion, pursue your dreams, identify your mission, and get out there and change the world. And once again, I'd like to thank the Cannabis Community Care Research Network for giving us the platform to discuss these life-changing topics, and I hope you all have a great event. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We're really grateful to work with you. We're very grateful to work with you. So again, as part of C3RN's mission, not only are we interested in students and academia and research, but we're also a social justice-minded organization that's looking to ensure access and equity in the industry, including those for people with disabilities, and making sure that those with disabilities and medical cannabis go hand in hand. And so I'm grateful that my colleague, David Cabral, is here to give some remarks about the importance of ensuring those with disabilities also have access to medical cannabis. So I'll hand it to...
Hi, everybody. I'm David Cabral. I'm happy to see everybody, all these beautiful people in this room today. So I wanted to start off by saying that I've been doing a little bit of research regarding healthcare and medical marijuana, and also I've been doing some research about the Medicare system and mass health. I know that there are a lot of people that are considered low income, and people who are considered low income have a barrier already in access to services. Sometimes if you go to the doctor or a hospital, they're not willing to provide medical marijuana for any patients because of the federal regulations against it. And so my research is trying to combat and find a way that we can have better access to change the system for people that currently are out of the system. And hopefully this will carry through to outside of this room. And another part of my research is also the disabled community having access to not only people that are on Medicare or mass health. Some of the barriers to access for me are interpreter services or a lack of interpreter services. A lot of interpreters work with federal agencies or have federal funding, and a lot of times the FDA and other federal agencies do not provide interpreters for certain events. So I'm working to change that to have more access for me and other people in the deaf community. And I'd also like to include ASL interpreting students in this realm too, to create a pool of people who are more comfortable in working in this realm. And hopefully with the passing of the laws in this state, we can combat some of the issues with the laws, the federal laws against it. It needs to be known that medical marijuana and recreational marijuana can change people's lives. When we're working with students, if you're working in a school setting, whether it's a college or a vocational school, sometimes you have students that might get kicked out of school because they've been caught with marijuana. And what happens with those students is I would like to see them maybe from 9th grade to 12th grade, and also college students as well, educate them. If someone's been arrested and they're a high school student, they usually get kicked out of school. And so getting kicked out of school or expelled deprives them of their education. And they're at a loss. So my idea is, as looking at the statistics of people who have been incarcerated or kicked out and expelled, thinking about how we can work for a better system, how we can change the system and develop a program that they receive some type of education. Maybe they get a fine for being caught, but then instead of putting them in jail or being arrested, they could go to an educational course and take something to learn about drug safety and dealing with youth offenders. So thank you very much for having me here, and appreciate your time, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thank you, Dave. We're very much looking forward to exploring different ways that we can increase access. So I now, without further ado, would like to turn to the panel. Thank you all for being here. I'll just maybe very quickly introduce each one of the speakers, and then hand it over to Dr. Aurora. So we'll start with Dr. Jordan Tischler. Dr. Tischler is a cannabis specialist, and through his internal medicine and years of practice as an emergency physician, he brings his knowledge, reason, and caring to patients at Inhale MD, and through his advocacy work at the local and national levels. Dr. Tischler graduated from both Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, trained at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and has spent many years working with the underserved, particularly veterans. Having treated countless patients harmed by alcohol and drugs, his observation that he had never seen a cannabis overdose led Dr. Tischler to delve deeply into the science of cannabis safety and treatment. Dr. Tischler is a frequent speaker and author on the variety of topics related to the medical applications of cannabis, and he's the president of the Association of Cannabis Specialists. Thanks for co-hosting this with us. And the treasurer and board of directors member of Doctors for Cannabis Regulation. Thank you, Dr. Tischler. Next to Dr. Tischler is Scott Churchill, who's the Director of Compliance and Methodology for MCR Labs. Scott brings over 15 years of diverse industrial and pharmaceutical experience to MCR. By leveraging his experience in management, quality assurance, and analytical chemistry, Scott ensures MCR Labs meets or exceeds regulatory compliance requirements, achieves operational excellence, and maintains leading-edge technological capabilities. In the pharmaceutical research field, Scott was a formulation scientist, a quality assurance expert, and analytical method development scientist. Scott understands that scientists are the most important asset of any analytical testing operation. To this end, he instituted a company-wide training program to ensure the high level of quality for all performed operations. Scott has a degree in chemistry from Rivier College. Thank you, Scott. And next to Scott, we have Elizabeth Dost. Elizabeth Dost is a registered nurse and senior healthcare executive with more than 25 years of experience. She's currently a senior executive healthcare consultant in medical cannabis and started in 2012 as the first nurse in Massachusetts to publicly advocate for the compassionate use of medical marijuana. Thank you, Beth. She is a cannabis nurse specialist and a member of the Association for Cannabis Clinicians. Beth is also a member of Americans for Safe Access, Patients Out of Time, and the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization. Beth has participated in public policy creation, collaborating with former Senate President Stan Roseberg, Senator Mark Pacheco, and Senator Pat Jalen, in addition to others. She's a registered participant of My Compassion and Medical Cannabis Institute, ASA, and serves as clinical director for the Massachusetts Patient Advocacy Alliance. She also serves as the healthcare strategist for Popbotics and recently joined the MedWell team. You have a lot of hats. Thank you, Beth, for being here today. Next to Beth, we have Dr. Ryan Zachlin. Dr. Zachlin is trained in internal medicine, geriatric medicine and integrative medicine, mind-body medicine, and cannabinoid medicine. He earned his Doctor of Medicine from the University of Virginia and completed his training in internal medicine at Mass General Hospital. After serving on faculty at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Zachlin continued working for partners in the Spalding Rehab Network. In addition to that, he is working in skilled nursing facilities and maintains a private practice in integrative medicine. Within his practice, Dr. Zachlin works together with his patients, partnering his foundation in internal medicine with mind-body medicine, yoga, energy medicine, herbal medicine, cannabis therapeutics, nutritional and functional medicine to help patients return to their natural state of balance. He views optimization of the endocannabinoid system via plant medicine and other integrative disciplines as essential to achieving this goal. Being also an accomplished musician, he has a particular interest in the link between ECS and music, which I find fascinating. Thank you, Dr. Zachlin, for being here. And last but certainly not least is Michael Dundas. Mike Dundas is the president and CEO of C3RN Naturals, the largest registered medical dispensary group in Massachusetts, with locations in Cambridge, Somerville, Needham, and Milford. Before being named CEO in November 2014, Mr. Dundas served as the C3RN's Chief Compliance Officer. And in July 2017, he was appointed by the Treasurer to serve on the Cannabis Advisory Board, a statutory body charged with making policy recommendations to the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission. Mr. Dundas played an instrumental role in founding the Commonwealth Dispensary Association, a trade organization that represents Massachusetts RMDs. He currently serves as the president of the association. Mr. Dundas was born and raised in Greater Boston, holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Juris Doctor from the University of San Francisco School of Law, where he is admitted to practice law in California, Massachusetts, and New York. Thank you, Mike, for being part of this. All right, and now to our fearless moderator, Dr. Nigam Arora. Dr. Nigam Arora is our Chief Life Sciences Guru officer at Cannabis Community Care and Research. He's an expert in interdisciplinary life science research and a dedicated community activist. Dr. Arora has worked on a range of research ideas, including plant physiology, organic chemistry, and medical device manufacturing. He completed his PhD in organic chemistry from Purdue in 2016 and a mini MBA in biopharma and innovation, from Rutgers University in 2017. He now serves as the Chief Life Sciences Scientific Officer of C3RN, where he leads our efforts in this area. So thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thanks, Marion, for the intros. Thanks all panelists for being here today. We'll start the panel with a few directed questions to each panelist, and then after that we'll open up Q&A to the audience. Please hold and remember your questions till the end. So first question is for Dr. Tischler. I want to take a moment to recognize our co-host, the Association of Cannabis Specialists. They have a booth over here, so if you haven't stopped and talked to them, make sure you do that before you leave today. So Dr. Tischler, you are the president of the Association of Cannabis Specialists. Please share with us what is the mission and vision of the association.
Well, thank you. The mission, we want to maintain the idea that medical cannabis is a medicine. We want to raise the standard of care for patients. We want physicians across the country and across the globe to understand that cannabis is a viable medicine, and that, as with all medicines, it has risks and benefits, and that we need to take them seriously, and that we need to not shy away from being able to use this for our patients. We see two groups of physicians. Really, there are, and I keep saying physicians, but really I should be saying clinicians, because we're more inclusive than certainly just MDs or DOs. But the goal here really is to focus on educating our colleagues to be particularly proficient at taking care of patients with cannabis, as well as to educate our peers who may not be interested or capable in their system of taking care of patients in this manner, but who would then refer patients to us. In addition to that, we want to work with product manufacturers and dispensaries to make sure that the patients are receiving the best medication and the best advice that they can get. And beyond that, obviously, we have a large political mission in which we want to take to Washington what we know and get the federal government to, shall we say, get off the stick and allow us to pursue some of this research and allow us to put into place tools for clinicians to be able to better serve their patients. That's sort of the overarching mission.
Thank you, Dr. Tischler. Follow-up question. As a pioneering clinician in the cannabis space, what do you see as the future in terms of cannabis dosing and product formulation? What should patients be aware of when they seek efficacious medicine in the future?
Wow. Okay, that's a big question. Dosing, I think, is really everything. We see that cannabis can be extraordinarily effective, but ironically, in a medical context, oftentimes less is more. And that when we use more than we need to, we end up with complications. And so when we start to think about how we want to formulate and present new tools, we really need to be able to think about specific dosing and being able to deliver a specific and repeatable amount by one means or another, meaning, say, vaporized or ingested, to get a expected result. I mean, in my mind, this is a lot of the difference between the recreational side of things and the medical side of things. Don't get me wrong, I think that both of these aspects are extraordinarily legitimate, but that the goals are somewhat different, and that for patients in particular, they want to feel well again, and they want to be able to trust that the medication is going to do for them each and every time exactly what they expected and need it to do. And in order to do that, we need to move the ball down the field in terms of that kind of specificity of dosing, such that we get each time that kind of expected result.
The second part of the question, and feel free to touch on it as lightly as you want, was about formulation. So currently we have flower, we have extract, we have edibles, we have topicals, and I think we're in kind of the early phases of those last three. Anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that we're struggling with a little bit because of the federal government, in addition to the sort of obvious problems that prohibition has caused solely on the medical side in terms of not being able to prescribe this stuff and not being able to do more research, is also the idea that the FDA isn't involved. And while I think many in the room may think of the FDA as sort of the enemy, in many ways they're really not. And one of the things that the FDA does for us is insist that research be done so that we know what works. So At the moment, we're in this kind of Wild West territory where people can make and sell products that, frankly, sound like a great idea, but do we know that it actually does something? So there are kind of two components to that. One is called bioavailability, which is really, okay, so I put the cannabis somewhere. Does it actually get into my body? And in many instances, the answer is actually no. Just because you put cannabis, say, on your skin, doesn't necessarily mean that it actually gets into your bloodstream or does what you'd expect. And then that other piece, the does what you expect, is efficacy. Once it gets in, what is it doing for us? And those are pieces that we really need to start addressing. The FDA would require it, and so I think ultimately we want to get the FDA involved in some form that allows us to make progress. But in the meantime, as an industry, we need to take the bull by the horns and really be able to say, okay, doctor, you can use this product because here's the data on its bioavailability. We've tested this under certain circumstances, and we've been able to show that it works for this particular indication. This is hard to do, and I don't think we're going to get there overnight, but this is the direction that we need to go in terms of formulations and business plans.
Great, thank you for that. And thank you for your work. We all in this room really appreciate it. So next question is for Mike. So Mike, thanks for joining us today. We're very interested to hear your perspective on some important issues. The first is that cannabis is medicine, and as with any other medicine, continuity and consistency is extremely important. This is especially true for patients that use cannabis as an integral part of their healthcare management for long-term and chronic conditions. What challenges do dispensaries face in this area, and what opportunities are there?
Let me start by thanking Marion and Randy and everybody here at C3RN for putting this on, and the folks at GTech Labs for hosting us. I think organizations like C3RN are few and far between, and the work that they do is extraordinary in bringing us all together to have this type of informational forum. I think that the question is an extraordinarily complicated one. I think Dr. Tischler touched on a couple of the issues related to dosing, and dosing is so critically important for being able to do the research. You got to know what exactly you're taking in order to see if it works, if it's effective. Some of the things that I've discovered in my somewhat short career in cannabis so far surprised me, frankly. I'm a little bit of a science geek, and when I first got involved in the space, I was very excited about building a very high-tech manufacturing facility. And the thought was to try to find ways to separate cannabinoids out and then recombine them in various recipes. And I know there are a lot of folks out there still looking to do that, and I applaud them for doing so. But I think that as I've moved through my journey with this medicine and this substance, it really strikes me as it's a very different type of medicine than what we typically see in the American medical system today, where we try to isolate particular molecules or compounds, separate them out, put them into pills, which lends itself more readily to the double-blind, placebo-based studies and that type of thing. Cannabis really seems to be most effective as a whole plant solution. And so another piece of this is that there are so many different compounds or so many different molecules in the cannabis plant that it's difficult to know which one is doing what exactly or what combination of which are doing what. For organizations like mine, we have a cultivation and products manufacturing facility. We've had to bring in our own in-house testing department, essentially. And we've gotten very sophisticated in our extractions methodologies to be very precise, to know exactly what we're trying to take out of the plant and to measure whether or not we actually get it all out. And so another problem that we face is when we infuse it back into other products, any final products, the substrates that we infuse into can be very different. A balm or a gel or a spray or an oil or a brownie or a cookie, which are usually oil and sugar-based, are all very different types of substrates. They absorb the cannabinoids in very different ways, at different rates and different ratios. Some of the processes involve heat and pressure and time. all of those things factor in. So we have to be very, very precise, and we're getting more and more precise with the methodologies that we use. But I guess the short answer to your question, it's a very complicated process, and it takes quite a bit of time and energy and attention to being able to do it precisely.
Thank you. That was a very thorough answer, and I think we all are, if we don't already know, are beginning to see this great challenge in front of us. And part of the reason we're here tonight is to discuss collaboration so we can meet this challenge and succeed in the medical cannabis space in the future. For yourself and for your company, C3RN Naturals, what areas of interest or what areas of research interest are you guys looking at or most interested in? So others in the industry are looking at extraction methodologies, food science and infusion, which you've touched on both, cultivation, vaporizers and other medical devices, as well as patient populations. So what are your research interests? And just some preliminary thoughts is totally fine.
Sure. So our primary research interest is in different product development. So we are a business that manufactures different types of cannabis products. Obviously, our first area of interest is in pushing the frontier of product development. But we have tried at C3RA to push the boundaries of the regulatory structure that we're in today, in recognizing that research is so difficult to accomplish, as Marion laid out concisely in her opening remarks. With just one federal lab providing the cannabis material to researchers, it's extraordinarily difficult to get a lot of research done. And so what we've tried to do, and we've only done it in one case so far, but we have tried to use work within the medical marijuana regulations to allow a group of researchers that were doing a device study. They're really actually looking at just one piece of a device, a thin membrane that they're trying to catch THC molecules on. They say there could be a number of different applications for the technology, but they had no way of obtaining the cannabis. They had a research license application in with the DEA and the FDA for a long time, and were frustrated in not being able to get cannabis to use. And so we actually invited them into our facility and carved out a little corner of our facility, let them bring their material in that they wanted to test, and we gave them some of the cannabis that we had. And we let them use that, obviously not to imbibe it or use it into their body at all, but we set up a little device that would take puffs off of a vape pen cartridge that we had made formulated specifically for them to very precise amounts of THC and CBD, allowed them to puff it through that membrane and then take measurements from the membrane to see if they were able to catch the THC and CBD molecules. And so, of course, once they were finished with that experiment, they would leave the facility without any cannabis material, including their membranes. And so in that way, we were able to be compliant with current regulation. Now, that's a sort of a rarefied case. It's a very narrow application. But it was one way that we were able to work within the regulations to try to push this type of research forward. We're very excited that the Cannabis Control Commission and that the recreational statute allows for a research type license. We'll be applying for a research license at C3RA for the Milford facility, and we hope to engage in a number of different research projects going forward.
Great, thank you. I personally was really interested to hear what your company is doing, as when we typically think of research, we think of academic labs and industry labs, so it's really great to hear about what C3RA is doing in those areas. Thank you. I would next like to address Beth. Beth, you are the first nurse, or you were the first nurse in Massachusetts to publicly advocate for the compassionate use of medical marijuana, and it did not stop there, so thank you. We really appreciate it.
It's a privilege. A privilege. Thank you.
So thanks for all your work you have done and for driving forward the advancement of medical cannabis. You and the Massachusetts Patient Advocacy Alliance, please stop by their booth.
Yes.
Were instrumental in the reform that now allows institutional caregivers and nurse practitioners to recommend cannabis. This is a huge accomplishment. Congratulations to you and to MPAA.
Yes. Thank you, and all the patients that come out.
So nurses are on the front line in healthcare. Please speak to the challenges that exist in integrating cannabis administration into current healthcare operations and facilities. Do you see opportunities for research here? Any thoughts in the area of cannabis administration beyond smoking?
Well, sure, there's, a multitude of opportunities beyond smoking for patients and for users of cannabis. But when we're talking about nurses and the challenges that face nurses, very similar to the challenges that face the institutions in which they live, which they work, which is that the institutions are generally Medicare and Medicaid certified institutions. And with the federal prohibition against cannabis and the Schedule 1 scheduling of cannabis actually affects the ability to use cannabis in these institutions. And so in Massachusetts, it's very unique that we have what is called the Institutional Caregiver Act. The institution actually becomes a caregiver. They typically designate one person to assist patients with the administration once they're certified by a certifying physician, and oftentimes many of the dispensaries will drop off medication to the institution. We currently are still seeking an institution that will step up to the plate and do this. This also spills over into other areas. So a solution to the institutional caregiver by working in a certified facility, meaning Medicare or Medicaid, is there can be work done in assisted living. Assisted living, for most of you who don't know, are really apartments. And the assistance is bought on a per diem or a as-needed basis, ad hoc basis, off of a menu of services to be delivered. So many patients, when they move, they're elder adults, and they've sold their house, and they've made that move into some place that they think is assisted to them. But it's actually an apartment. And these apartments are loosely regulated, and they're a very good place to start looking at institutional work and finding patients that we can test out the institutional caregiving laws and at least the statute of delivery to institutions for distribution on a large scale.
Thank you for sharing those details. I certainly learned a lot just now. Another question for you, Beth. Care for child, elder, and disabled populations can be challenging. What are some of the greatest challenges with integrating cannabis into these areas of care? Where might research collaborations help move things forward?
You know, many of our patients are actually disabled, and disabled patients are often among the most fragile individuals, and research can be multifold when it comes to disability. Some dispensaries work on research projects with different and various kinds of injuries or seizure disorders or many different MS. There's many opportunities for research with the disabled population. And then we talked about children, and there's also research that can be done with regard to family dynamics and how that is impacted in families that have disabled family members, including children, where access is particularly challenging.
Thank you, and thanks for all your work. Next, I'd like to ask a question to Scott. Scott, you are the Director of Methodology and Compliance at Massachusetts Cannabis Research Labs. That's what MCR stands for. So MCR is a leader in cannabis testing in Massachusetts. As a classically trained analytical chemist, what opportunities do you see in cannabis research that are not currently being addressed? And where would collaborations prove most useful?
Thank you. I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaborations that are outside of what is commonly thought of for a chemistry lab. Essentially, we solve problems for people. We identify the structure and nature, the properties of the materials and the components in it, and we measure how much is there, and we provide that information to a variety of people. And it's all collaboration. We collaborate with patients that come in that are trying to treat a sick spouse as they try to figure out a specific formulation that they think will be helpful. We collaborate with product developers who are trying to create a device that's going to enhance or improve the experience of the user or patient. We work with dispensaries and cultivators on what the chemical profile is, the terpenes, the cannabinoids, and we've worked with clinicians on what are the chemical profiles and how is it impacting their patients, or psychologists that are studying the impact of cannabis therapy on naive patients and how it impacts their health over time and how it could be measured. Chemistry is considered the central science. So we're basically surrounded with groups that we collaborate with. And two groups that are often under thought of when people think about collaborations with a testing lab are regulators and the community at large, activists and so forth. And I think that there are important areas of focus that can go into improving cultivators' technique and yield and minimizing their impact on the environment. There's processors, much the same. You can improve those and create diverse products. Even as far as identifying new cannabinoids, new strains, and so forth, we could help with that. I think that each group has an aspect that we can kind of collaborate on and make improvements on. We recently created the Cannabis Review that takes the literature that's available on studies that have been done on patients and in some cases animals with cannabis therapeutics and the outcomes, and we've organized it and graded it based on the veracity of the data so that it's easy to search through and find out the information you need to find out in absence of having a traditional relationship where you're prescribed a specific route of administration, dosage, period of time, etc. This is for the people that don't have that kind of information and are looking to improve their therapeutic outcomes. But most important, I think, is changing the narrative on what cannabis is. There's a lot of people, doctors and scientists will oftentimes think that we need to move it into the FDA model, and it should be scheduled as a drug that pharmaceutical companies can then cut up, slice up, and recombine into specific formulations, and that's all it is. When in reality, there's likely many buckets that cannabis needs to fall into. And I think a pharmaceutical approach for certain acute therapeutics is an important avenue that should be available to the pharmaceutical industry. I think there's also potentially a prophylactic approach for more of a nutraceutical, vitamin-type supplement approach that can be very good at preventing bad things from happening over time, and a whole host of other things, including traditional medicine, where you have this plant that has hundreds of coactive ingredients and can be very dialed in specifically to an individual's need, kind of like the movement towards personalized medicine in the pharmaceutical industry. Well, we already have that option and that ability here with this diverse plant with its broad spectrum activity. And outside of its therapeutic and enjoyment perspectives and its preventative applications, there's a number of other applications, and I think it's super important for everybody involved here when it comes to collaboration in creating a narrative that allows a great deal of freedom in how we move forward with cannabis.
Well, thank you, Scott. That's a very informative response. As a chemist and as someone working in the industry, I've learned a lot just now, so thank you. Just want to ask you a quick follow-up. I was actually surprised by the amount of collaborations you listed immediately when I asked. So then the obvious question is, what collaboration don't you have, or what collaboration do you desire?
I desire a lot of collaboration. I think having more of a wide-reaching federal level, people who are against cannabis, people who are in favor of it, people who know nothing about it. I think that it's important moving forward that we have a fact-based, rational approach to our relationship with this companion species. And I think whatever collaboration can help facilitate that would be ideal.
Well, thank you, and thanks to MCR for pioneering this in this space. So I've got a couple questions for Dr. Zachlin now. Dr. Zachlin, you are an integrative physician who takes into account all aspects of your patient's life and lifestyle. You are also an expert in terpene-related therapy. We are excited for you to share your knowledge today. Dr. Zachlin, can you tell us what is a terpene, and can you tell us what is the entourage effect and how do terpenes play into that?
First of all, I want to thank C3RN, Marion, Randy, Nigam, everybody for inviting me here. This is the hardest test that I've had since medical school. So what is a terpene? A terpene or terpenoid, they're interchangeable terms, is actually a chemical structure. I think it's C16H10. I'm not exactly sure, being put on the spot here. And what this chemical structure is used amongst plants, animals, living things to communicate. It's a signal. And so even beta-carotene has that structure in it. So the precursors for vitamin A actually have terpene structures in it. What terpenes basically, how they play a role, it's not really well understood. That's why we need more research. I usually give an example of, so I mean, if you look at the different strains, right, if we have an equal amount of THC in each strain, many of you and many of the people here have had experience where one particular strain might cause the typical couch lock of an indica strain, right, or it might rev somebody up. So let's take the indica nomenclature. So sativa versus indica is really it's really a phenotype, or it's what the plants appear to be physically. And that's been kind of misinterpreted over time into a nomenclature that indicates or implies chemotype, or really what the effect is of the individual plant. So in order for a plant, so we usually refer to indica strains as kind of causing more of the couch lock effect. They're more sedative, more relaxing. Well, really it's those strains that have greater than 0.5% of myrcene in them, which is a terpene. The myrcene is what's thought to cause that couch lock effect. And within, I refer to stoner folklore, or however you want to call it, consuming mangoes before you would consume cannabis, right, would enhance the high. Mangoes are high in myrcene. So to me, what got me interested in terpenes and their effect is that I noticed that strains that had an equal amount of THC had very different effects depending on, and different scents, different odors, and that really is a combination of the terpene profile as well as the other cannabinoids. It's not really well understood. So then the second part of the question is the ensemble effect, or the entourage effect. So the entourage effect really is, I think of it, there's a double layer to the entourage or ensemble effect. So there's the ensemble effect of cannabis itself, in which it's thought that THC is really the key that kind of unlocks the door, and the other phytocannabinoids and terpenes that are in the cannabis contribute to whatever the cascade of events are that follows that unlocking of the door. So then we look at the door itself, which is really my interest, which is the endocannabinoid system. And the endocannabinoid system itself has an ensemble effect. So we have the CB1 receptor, so we have one door, but we have many keys for the same door. And those different keys elicit different effects, a different cascade of physiological effects. So, there's much more to it, but I think that's hopefully a general enough overview.
Sure. Thank you. for that detailed overview. For everyone who doesn't know what endocannabinoid is or anything like that, talk to Dr. Stacklin afterwards. Second question for you. In your clinical practice, what has been your experience with stigma? Is it particularly strong in older patients who have lived with prohibition for their whole lives? What can we do to reduce this stigma and make the process of getting a recommendation and obtaining medicine easier for patients? What type of research collaborations might aid this effort?
It's a great question. So it's best told, I think, with a story. I had a patient that came in, an elderly gentleman in his late 60s, early 70s. He had experience with cannabis back in the day, but was coming in as suggested by actually his a plastic surgeon, who was a hand surgeon, had referred him to me to help with some chronic pain that he was having. And he had sent me a follow-up email and noted that there was that the patient that was sitting in the waiting room following him was a 20 or 30-year-old man that was kind of poorly shaven and was just there to get a card. And he couldn't have been more wrong. The young gentleman that was waiting for me had debilitating anxiety. He has a family. He's a businessman. He was not working at the time. When he was seeing my practice, he's currently employed. But that was a kind of flavor of the stigma, and I think the hinge point for turning the stigma around, first of all, is to reach out to my fellow physician colleagues who I think generally are uncomfortable with this, and rightfully so, because the research, we're really kind of stuck back in the reefer madness days in terms of where the research is at. The rest of science is really caught up. So part of what I've done is to reach out to them and to teach them about the endocannabinoid system, to tell them what it is I do. And I show them, I have a little dropper bottle, and I show them that, we're not going to start out smoking. We're going to start out with microdosing, taking 2 drops 3 times a day and titrate up from there. And I think that where another hinge point is that as there are more and more stories of positive results, I think that's really where we begin to break the stigma down. I have another patient, 58-year-old man, no interest in intoxication or getting high, 40-year history of migraines, would have 13 migraines a month, debilitating, would last 2 to 3 days, has tried everything, was on a whole combination of medications. He was referred to me by his neurologist, who knew that I had opened my practice. I put him starting on a combination of a cannabis tincture that actually had 1-to-1-to-1 THCA, THC, CBDA, and CBD, and other tinctures, as well as a vape pen for breakthrough. And he kind of found those on his own. I just recommended him getting the tinctures. He came back to see me, and he hadn't had a migraine in over a month for the first time in years. So to me, there's research, right? There's bench-side research, there's clinical research, randomized controlled trials, and then there's this guy who had debilitating migraines and is not having them and is no longer needing his medicine. So that's part of my research. And just I'll kind of finish off that as a clinician, I'm always doing research, right? There's a bell curve inside my head. Every time I see a patient that has congestive heart failure and I tinker with their diuretics, right? I'm adding to that bell curve of, is this person an outlier? Are they the average? Does this work? If that diuretic doesn't work, no matter what the evidence says, if I keep using torsemide and it just never works, it does, but maybe that just never works, eventually I'm going to shift my way away towards using it, right? So I think there's a combination of both bench-side research, bedside research, and then really in the office, we need more practitioners that are willing to come forth and treat patients with this powerful medicine and collect more and more stories, collect more and more data, and put that data and information together and use that as a way to break down the stigma wall.
Thank you. That was very informative. I think everything we're doing here tonight goes in line with what you said, so let's work together to kill stigma. So, thank you to all the panelists. This has been great. And now we're going to go ahead and open to questions from the audience. So I don't know if, Marion, you want to take the mic? Do we have another mic working? Is that one?
Thank all your panelists for all the insight you've brought in, and I think you guys are doing great stuff, but unfortunately, one of the limitations you've been facing is that federally cannabis is illegal, and there's been a lot of pushback against actually having full trials about it. So fortunately, other countries have not had that limitation. I can say Israel's been one of the most progressive countries in cannabis studies. Australia already has a 10-year study of individuals aged 14 to 25 on the effects of cannabis. So moving forward, and actually currently, what's going on in terms of collaboration? Because I've heard that a lot over the, a bunch of guys have said collaboration's a big thing. So how are we going to use the international community and the research they've already done now and moving forward?
All right, thank you. Great question. So I think you make a good point, but as much as we sit here, not sit here, but as much as we talk about all these things, I think we are driving forward, but we need to have patience as well. It's been a long fight. So we're still fighting. Thank you for highlighting some of the work done in other countries. I think that I don't have the authority to say.
I can answer.
Sorry, thanks.
So let's remember that Israel, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in the 1960s identified CBD first and then THC. Subsequently in the 80s identified the CB1 receptor, and in the early 90s identified anandamide and the endocannabinoid system. So we're already collaborating. I mean, we're talking about, right, so there's an altruistic attainment of knowledge that we're seeking and an understanding of this medicine. And I think that if we look at models of collaboration in all aspects of medicine, that exists, right? It's not existing in isolation. But what's unique about this particular industry is you have this entity, this medicine that is also used recreationally, right? And is also used, so it's kind of, there's a blend. And so you have a very unique industry that has, that's evolved. So I think that, I mean, I can speak from a medical standpoint. I think those collaborations may just involve, at this point, I mean, if we can't do the research, we just have to look at the results that other countries are getting, right? And I think that I've thought a lot about this because, unfortunately, Dr. Craker couldn't be here tonight, but I mean, this is his story. And he was featured in Bloomberg on how there's a multi-billion-dollar industry that Canada, Israel, they're all getting ahead of the United States because we're limited in what we're able to do. But I have faith that, we're all connected. People are smart. There's ways to collaborate and recapitulate and emulate. And I don't think it will be as much of an issue as anticipated going forward.
Great. Do we have another?
I just have one thing to add to that. We all sit here, and we're so fortunate to be here and to have this group and to be able to speak in a state where it's legal in all manners. But these type of conversations still don't happen in about half the states. Or if they happen as more as how to keep out cannabis from their state rather than integrate it into the use for patients who suffer and into the general population. And so we have to remember that we live in a nice little bubble here and that we have some ability to research, and all of us have identified areas that we can research in. But there are many states that do not enjoy this freedom that we have. And so to Dr. Zeklin's point, it is a collaboration of the world because the plant's been around for 5,000 years, first used by the Chinese for pain 4,000 years ago. So we have a lot of knowledge about this, probably a lot more than many of the pharmaceutical that we use on a daily basis and the polypharma that we see our patients using. So anyway, just wanted to add that we were very fortunate to be here to have this conversation because it doesn't happen everywhere here in the United States.
All right, who else got a question?
Hi, my question is advocacy, and I think it's to Beth as well as the other panelists who have, I'm here. So I got introduced by Joseph Gilmore when he was running the campaign, and I remember at that time being really, really hesitant. I remember telling him, like, I can't sign this for you because of religious reasons and cultural reasons, and I'm Somalian, and the youth use cannabis. However, the older populations, it's like a huge stigma, and so I've really want communities, just in general, whether it's Boston, Dorchester, or the Somali, the Cape Verdean, whatever it might be, to learn, advocate for it, to teach them, to educate them, so that they understand, because my mother has been in so many medications, it's crazy. So I was thinking of like where, any of your institution interested in creating an advocacy group to address certain parts of Boston, and just because I've attended the public hearing meetings last year, there hasn't been like a diverse group that showed up, and so I'm wondering, like, just because the policies Massachusetts has passed, regulations, does the advocacy stop there, or do we want to continue?
The advocacy has just begun. This has just begun. For all those groups that you mentioned, for patients who the law was passed in 2012, and as we go forward, I think that Mr. Dundas would agree that the advocacy has just begun for equal access, safe access, and access for all that need it, regardless of age, gender, race, religion. It doesn't matter. Cannabis is here. It's here for all of us. We all have an endocannabinoid system that can use cannabis, and I believe on a daily basis. You know, once I heard Dr. Raphael Meshulam say that cannabis should be as available as aspirin. And at the time I thought, wow, this was a little while ago. And I believe that cannabis should be as available as aspirin. So that's where I stand.
Thanks for that question, and thanks, Beth. I'm going to take one question that got texted in, and then we got a couple people in the back who we'll get to. So a couple people had asked two questions. One is, as a student of public health policy, what can I do to be involved in the cannabis industry? Another asked, as a student in plant and soil science, how can I get involved in the cannabis industry going forward? So to the panel, I would like to ask, what can a student do to get involved in industry in a professional way and on a high level?
Speaking from someone who built our organization essentially from scratch, there has never been, in my opinion, a better time for young people or anyone else to try to throw their hat into the cannabis industry. I think the way that the regulations for adult use cannabis have been structured in creating a number of additional classes to the original statutory classes, the craft cultivator class, the micro business class, and then coming in a year or so, social consumption and perhaps delivery classes of license, all create avenues for young people to get involved in the space. I also think there's a growing number of cannabis organizations, and I can speak from the industry side. Cultivators, product manufacturers, retailers are going to be sprouting up across the Commonwealth in the coming months and years. And so I would simply say we're really at the very beginning, the tip of the spear, if you will, of the adult use industry here in Massachusetts. And I think it will, by all indications, be much, much larger than the medical industry has been thus far. I don't think that the medical industry is going to go away. I think that there are a number of folks out there that are going to continue to offer and operate in the medical cannabis space. But I think if other states are any indication, the size of the adult use industry will probably be substantially larger and create substantially more opportunity in that regard.
Thank you, and Dr. Tischler is going to offer a thought.
Oh, well, I'm just going to suggest that, in fact, there are many opportunities, but I'm going to take exception to the idea that the medical side of things is going to be dwarfed by recreational. I think that the statistics actually show that there are many, many users of recreational cannabis, but that is in general a capitated audience, meaning there are a certain group of people who are going to use this stuff, and that's great, and they're going to love to buy more products, but the number of people in this country who are aging and becoming more ill over time and who can use this stuff for their well-being and for healing is an astounding number that will, in fact, dwarf any recreational group. And I think that, you know, what we're seeing in other states that Mike correctly points out is a very large sort of blip, if you will, due to the enthusiasm of, wow, we've gotten past prohibition. And that's a wonderful thing. And I think that there's a lot of interesting products and money to be made in that field. But if we really want to take the long-term view and include whole plant medicine that Scott alluded to, as well as the pharmaceutical approach, very clearly we're going to see that be the growth industry. And so again, to the question of what you can do to get involved, to the person who is in the public health side of things, there's an enormous amount of research that needs to be done, whether you're talking about social justice or public health or coming benefits, coming potential risks. There are all sorts of things. And then not least of which is this is going to open new vistas in pharmaceutical development. It's going to open new opportunities to take care of patients. So, go become a chemist, go to graduate school, go to medical school. I never thought I'd say that publicly, by the way. Be a nurse, absolutely, go to nursing school. And if you're really looking for something to do in the short term, come volunteer here with the Association of Cannabis Specialists. We have plenty for you to do.
I wanted to just make one comment. Along those lines, if there's any people out there, any young people out there, if you want to go do post-bac for 2 or 3 years, 4 years of medical school, 3 years of residency, in 10 years, come see me. And if you are an ECS or cannabis specialist, I will help you find a job.
Well, that was awfully nice, Dr. Z. I have one more question here.
I wanted to add something to that real quick.
Go ahead.
Sorry. There's the, in terms of like young people who don't know how to move forward or get involved, there's the MPAA. There's Students for Sensible Drug Policy. There's Cannabis Community Care and Research Network. There's NORML. There's a lot of advocacy groups that are going to give you opportunities to get involved right away and help introduce you to all of the different aspects of this. And there's your own community, and outside of the existing ones, if you see an avenue that you don't think is properly addressed, you could create your own advocacy group. So I would keep in mind the advocacy groups that are there as a starting point.
Thank you, Scott. And Randy is going to hand over the mic for our last question.
One last question.
I think we know where it's at.
So I'm about to say something I never thought I'd say on God's green earth. Thank God for Mitch McConnell. It's still hard to say it with a definitive. And so this is going to be like a three-part thing, question. So as we, go for whatever Schedule 3 or completely no schedule whatsoever on industrial, will that include an avenue into CBD, and can we then do good CBD research at universities, maybe starting at the University of Kentucky? And so my other question is, I'm a holistic health person background, and I'm a big believer in using the plant in the most wise way possible. And I'm just wondering if Beth or Dr. Zacklin, I forget your first name, Ryan, if you had experience using a less THC form of a marijuana or a cannabis plant in a juicing capacity in terms of cancer or what I'm dealing with, Lyme disease. And so I'm just kind of wondering if you've done that juicing to help like really create that sense of energy in the body and vitality I understand, I was just talking to somebody that they're doing it out west, and I've known people who've done it around here when they have a significant amount of plant. So if you could address that, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Specifically about juicing, had a lot of patients come to me and talk to me about juicing, and I think that it's a reasonable starting point, and certainly what we get mostly out of juicing, in addition to sort of the whole plant aspect of things, is a whole lot of THCA, and there's a lot of really interesting research now coming out about how THCA is an incredibly potent anti-inflammatory. In fact, not probably, at least based on the studies that exist, puts CBD to shame. And furthermore, has fewer of the complications that we can, in fact, see with CBD in terms of at high dose interacting with conventional medications. So I think it's a wonderful idea. And I wish that we were speaking to sort of Mike Dundas's earlier conversation, seeing more availability in the dispensaries of THCA products. I only know of one dispensary at the moment that has such a thing. I will say, just a matter of caution, that most of the people that I know who are juicing are growing their own plants. And as you know, cannabis is a very avid plant, meaning whatever is in its environment, particularly in the soil or water, will be picked up by the plant, and this often includes pesticides. But the thing I worry about is heavy metals in particular, and so if you're juicing the plant, you get all of that too. So this leads me right back into MCR and the rest of the lab guys. I absolutely think that the $50 that it takes to get your plant tested for all of these things is money beautifully well spent and for your health. So I would advise that.
I also like to add, thank you, Dr. Tischler, that the terpenes are some of the most volatile compounds. So even when you dry cannabis and cure it, you're losing a lot of those valuable terpenes. So also by juicing as well, you're gonna maintain some of those terpenes.
And as the nurse, I would have to say that it's really a trial and error and what works for you. You're the center of your universe, and you are really the controller of your wellness and your health care and how you want to feel. Only you know that for sure. And that there are many avenues in cannabis in a state where it's legal, whether it's juicing and whether it's juicing in soil and with water that you know you've distilled and you're planting it in combination with other plants that you think are beneficial to you that add to the taste, whether you're taking CBD, whether you're taking formulations. That's really all, it depends on how you feel and what you want to get out of your wellness and your being. So I would applaud you and encourage you to go ahead and seek out some advice, but test and try, and that's the beauty of this plant, is that it's testable. As a person.
I think you also asked something about the FDA rubric or federal scheduling, and I just wanted to say, I think it's very important as we think about moving the federal government that we move it in a way that allows us to use cannabis in the ways that we understand it to be useful. Meaning, yes, ultimately there will be a pharma approach to this that I think will be very exciting because, as Mike pointed out earlier, cannabis is rather different in that it has this ensemble of chemicals that don't work individually but work collectively. And I think that's very important. And once we start to tease that apart, we're going to be able to do miraculous things with it. I don't use that word very often or very lightly. But the point I'm getting at is, in the interim, and in addition to that, we need a rubric through the FDA such that we can use whole plant medicine. And I think that that's achievable, and that's a lot of what we're working on right now.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Creative Officer, Randy McCaffrey.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. What a wonderful discussion. So grateful for all of you guys' leadership. We could not be here we could not be doing this without you guys. And thank you so much. I want to say to everybody that the text polling is very important, so continue to do that. We're going to be releasing answers to your questions in our next report. So we're excited here to have our series sponsors and our March event sponsors. You know, I want to thank you again to all of you guys, and thank you for everybody that's helped us out along the way. Sierra Naturals, MCR Labs, New England Treatment Access, Seaweed Technologies, Revolutionary Clinics, NECAN, Sensi Magazine, Philos Bioscience, the Harvest Cup, Green Nurses Group, Inhale MD, Association of Cannabis Specialists, a lot of them are up here. Cannacorp, thank you, Michael. Go Fire, there's some new stuff going on over there. Evio Labs, they're a new supporter. Thank you for being here. Basque Cannabis, thank you so much. Stock and Beans, Sale Cannabis, Massachusetts Patient Advocacy Alliance, thank you guys. I'd also like to thank all the in-kind sponsorship. G-Tech Labs, thank you. Let's have a round of applause for those guys for having this space for us. Really appreciate it. John Murphy at Expressive Productions, Colette Auger at Mind Transient, Jason Betancourt, who has helped us along the way with his photography, DJ Ryan Brown, thank you. You're going to be hearing some of his good stuff later. Vin Pugliese for the lighting. Thank you so much, Vin. Healing Tree Edibles, all should go check out Mish over there. And Down the Road Brewery, they were kind enough to donate some adult beverages to us. So please stay tuned for our next event on April 30th, 2018 on cannabis and the impact on the opioid epidemic. We'll be hosting the event in Holyoke together with Cannabis Control Commissioner Jen Flanagan is going to be on the panel. Aaron Vega, who is a House Representative. Dr. Peter Grinspoon, who is here. If you see him, please go up and say hello. And you can find more information on our folders. So thank you again, and please visit all of our interactive booths and come say hello to everybody that's up here. And thank you to Dr. Nigam Arora for his wonderful leadership here too. Yeah, that's about all I got. So please come say hello and enjoy the rest of the evening, guys. Thank you so much.